The Stormtrooper, it's the one constant reminder of the Galactic Empire's presence all throughout the Star Wars universe. Their image is posted on all sorts of propaganda, both in-universe and in real life. The Stormtrooper is amongst the most popular characters to be depicted by cosplayers in any fandom, not just in Star Wars. And it all starts with the Stormtrooper helmet, which has been at the center of many fan debates. These helmets look cool, they're intimidating, they're supposed to provide a certain degree of protection, but they also seem to suffer from the classic form over function design, which makes them incredibly difficult to see out of and use in conjunction with weapons and heavy machinery. Not even the Star Wars canon knows how to address this issue.
This helmet! I can't see!
That scene kind of runs counter to how Obi-Wan Kenobi sees the Stormtroopers and their helmets.
Blast points, too accurate for sand people. Only Imperial Stormtroopers are so precise.
But then Luke Skywalker also contradicts Obi-Wan Kenobi later on when he tries on a helmet on the Death Star.
I can't see a thing in this helmet.
There's a lot of controversy and debate around the lore surrounding the Stormtrooper helmet, and that extends outside of the fandom as well into the legal realm even. Originally, the Stormtrooper helmet was imagined by legendary illustrator Ralph McQuarrie. A clay model of the helmet was eventually made by puppeteer Nick Pemberton, but the studio had problems creating the actual helmet itself. They tried to use plaster to basically create the shape and form of the helmet, but that didn't really work. It's at that point that Pemberton remembered that his neighbor, Andrew Ainsworth, ran a small business making plastic things like kayaks, car parts, and other things like that. Ainsworth was commissioned to do a prototype of the helmet, and George Lucas liked the design so much that he ordered 50 immediately and then kind of jetted off to Tunisia, aka Tatooine. Ainsworth had charged Lucas around 20 pounds per helmet back then, but then in the early 2000s, he took those old molds out of the storage room and made some helmets for private collectors. He's apparently trying to raise some money for school fees for his children. Ainsworth would be contacted by George Lucas's lawyers and sued for copyright infringement. I mean, this is sort of the dark side of George Lucas that we don't talk about that much. Even before he sold Star Wars to Disney, he was always a very successful and sometimes ruthless businessman, as much as he was an artist. I would argue that he was an even better businessman than he was a film creator. It's kind of fitting and ironic at the same time that this symbol of tyranny and authoritarianism would have such a controversial history rooted in the greed of the creator of this entire franchise. Now, while we're on the subject of conceptual designs for movie props, I thought it'd be a great time to introduce our sponsor for today's video, Skillshare. It's the ultimate learning platform where you can find endless amounts of courses on all sorts of awesome subjects, like this industrial design course from Julia Troy, for instance. Industrial design is where art marries form and function together. Did you know that before Ralph McQuarrie became known for his Star Wars concept art, he illustrated teeth and equipment for a dentistry firm? And then he went on to work for Boeing, where he drew diagrams for a manual on the construction of the 747 jumbo jet. Andrew Ainsworth also was a qualified industrial designer before he started working on those Stormtrooper helmets. Who knows, maybe one of you guys watching at home can draw the next big pop culture design that's as popular as the Stormtrooper helmet. I'm a firm believer that we're all really good at a few things here and there. It just takes most of us an entire lifetime to figure out what that thing is. Skillshare provides a quick and easy way for you to explore all sorts of new skills, abilities, and even professions, which normally require far more of a time commitment and financial investment. In many ways, Skillshare is one of the most valuable gifts you can give to yourself, to your friends, and your loved ones. And that's because finding a new skill or hobby or even profession that you love is completely priceless. If you guys are interested in this, the first 1,000 people who use my link down below can get a free 1-month trial to Skillshare and see for themselves what all the fuss is about. Well guys, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Now in universe, the Stormtrooper helmets can trace its lineage and design all the way back to the Clone Wars. Ironically, these helmets that symbolize an evil fascist dictatorship with human supremacy tendencies can trace its design all the way back to an original Kaminoan design. The Kaminoans were also xenophobic and saw themselves as superior to other races, including human beings. The Kaminoans were excellent geneticists and cloners though, and their clone troopers would be widely considered one of the finest infantry soldiers in galactic history. However, when it came to armor design, the Kaminoans had very little experience in designing things that fit on the human body. And so the Phase 1 clone trooper armor that we see during the Battle of Geonosis, while very protective and sturdy, was also extremely uncomfortable to wear and pinched the clone troopers in all of the wrong places. This is also why they look really stiff when they're walking around. It's not just because they're CGI. And the helmet design also had some serious issues, although the clones were really the last ones to complain about such things. You see, the clone troopers had their genetics altered from their base template Jango Fett and were made more agreeable and docile. I mean, just imagine the chaos there would be if they cloned 100,000 pure Jango Fetts. The Phase 1 clone trooper armor and helmet wasn't just a piece of protection to the clones. It was an object that they desired from a very young age, when they were still young clone cadets working their way through all of the lectures and training courses. You have to remember, every aspect of a clone's life was closely monitored, from their leisure time to what they ate, and so they all basically went through the same life experience. And so everyone had one end goal and desire, and that was to become a full-blown clone trooper. And so getting your first suit of armor and helmet and Dees was akin to getting your first driver's license, your first job, getting bar mitzvahed, and your sweet 16 all wrapped into one thing. It's the only object that clones look forward to getting throughout their childhood. And these inexperienced young men had never seen any other helmet design than the one they worshipped since they were young kids, and so they didn't really see the design flaws in this helmet. The Battle of Geonosis proved to be a rude awakening for the clones. They found out that their Jedi generals had good leadership abilities, but completely lacked military training, and so they didn't really understand the strategic and tactical demands of commanding an infantry unit. The clones would suffer heavy casualties as a result in this first battle. This was also a great opportunity for them to try out their helmets and armor on a battlefield for the first time, and they found out that, hey, these helmets actually don't fit that well, and they do obscure the wearer's vision somewhat. This is kind of surprising because you could almost make a custom fit helmet for the clones because all of their heads are basically shaped the same. But again, this is something that the Kaminoans overlooked. Eventually, the Phase 2 clone trooper armor and helmets would be developed. It would be first field tested by the ARC troopers and then adopted by the larger army. One of the big changes from Phase 1 is the visor area, which was widened and extended to provide more peripheral vision. You can see how this design would eventually evolve into what we know as the Stormtrooper helmet. You did have the TK Trooper variant for a short period of time. They were kind of like the prototype for the Stormtrooper program. Notice the much larger eye ports here. These helmets, which first appeared in the Bad Batch, were inspired by some of Ralph McQuarrie's early concept art for the original Star Wars film. Now, a huge part of why Emperor Palpatine only slightly modified the clone trooper design when he created the Stormtrooper design was because he wanted to build off of the legacy of the clones. They had protected the galaxy from the Separatist threat and the Jedi coup that followed. They were known for being selfless and brave and were the definition of what it meant to be professional soldiers. And by pivoting off of that brand, he hoped that the Stormtroopers would inherit some of that goodwill that the clone troopers' sacrifice paid for during the previous war. Now, the white color of the Stormtrooper helmet is an interesting choice, right? It clearly sticks out in almost every environment except for snowy ones, and even then the Stormtroopers had special cold weather snowtroopers to fit that role. I mean, how often do these Stormtroopers carry out operations inside of Apple stores? So, the real reason why the Stormtrooper helmets are white is because they're following, obviously, the Clone Trooper design, but the real reason why the Clone Trooper helmets are white is because of the Kaminoans. Kaminoans were expert cloners, not expert military uniform designers. They didn't really think about camouflage, I guess, when they designed these helmets. What's interesting is the Kaminoans could see light in the ultraviolet spectrum, and so they painted their cities and facilities with paint that was only visible to them. What looks like a hellish Apple Store-like landscape on Tipica City is actually full of vibrant colors that they can only see, and the same thing goes with the Clone Trooper's armor. Now, obviously, George Lucas also really likes the dystopian and unnatural vibe that pure white displays, as seen in his THX-1138 film. At least in universe, the Empire chooses white not because they're like the British and they wanted, their soldiers to stand out and intimidate their enemies. I'm talking about the redcoats, by the way. The reason they actually did this was because they adopted a color scheme from an alien race that doesn't even see in the same light spectrum as human beings. Which is ironic considering the Empire's love of high human culture and human supremacy. But the helmets, which started out as a means for production, adopted a whole new purpose in the Empire, which didn't wage war against separatist and droid armies. Now, the Empire waged a war against its own people. And the Stormtrooper helmet, well, it was actually like the first line of defense for a Stormtrooper because it concealed their identity. It was very hard for a average Imperial citizen to identify who was wearing that armor. By making the troopers faceless and anonymous, it made it easier for the Stormtroopers to crack down on the citizens of the Empire and use more forceful methods if necessary. Many Stormtroopers have talked about how the Stormtrooper armor makes them feel safe and secure. It protects them not only physically, but also mentally, from the shame of the actions they commit on behalf of the Empire's name. The suit of armor and helmet also gave Stormtroopers a sense of power, a sense of purpose and belonging. It gave them the confidence to do what was necessary to maintain what they thought was peace and stability. Without a human face to look at, without eyes that you can make contact with, it also became very hard for Imperial citizens to appeal to these more robotic-looking troopers. These helmets also made all of the Stormtroopers look completely the same, and it made their numbers seem infinite, making reconnaissance or information gathering relatively difficult from a tactical sense. And from a strategic sense, it's just kind of demoralizing to think that your enemy will never run out of soldiers. But here's the real messed up part. These helmets were also designed to control the people wearing them as well. We learned from the novel Twilight Company that every Stormtrooper's helmet actually recorded data from their patrols. It's not all that different from a body cam worn by a police officer, but unlike those body cams worn by police officers, you're not just viewing the tape when there's an incident, you're viewing the tape after every patrol, or at least the ISB monitors are. The Empire wasn't just looking for poor performance or bad behavior, they were also looking for seditious conversations, or basically any conversation that wasn't crucial to the mission at hand. As much as the Empire brainwashed and conditioned the Stormtroopers to be loyal to Emperor Palpatine, Emperor Palpatine still didn't really trust anyone, including these very fanatic and loyal soldiers, and this is why the Stormtroopers are designated by their number and not by their name and rank. I mean, even the clone troopers had nicknames that they called each other. This is how far his kind of control went. And these Stormtroopers, they're not really supposed to have any idle chatter at all, and this is because Emperor Palpatine doesn't want them talking to each other, exchanging ideas, and potentially revolting. The Empire wanted the Stormtroopers to see each other as numbers. They didn't want them to have any emotional connections with each other, and if an entire legion needed to be sacrificed for the good of Emperor Palpatine, then so be it. Authoritarian regimes really focus on this a lot. They want their own narrative to win, and so they try to basically separate people in society and isolate them from their peers. When a person feels alone and can't share any intimate thoughts with another person, when they spend too much time with themselves, they begin questioning their own gut instincts. Is what I'm doing here wrong? Should I be executing these alien babies here for no reason? Is the Empire actually a force for good? In that vacuum of human connection and conversation, the only thing that a Stormtrooper gets to see and hear is Imperial propaganda. The words of the Emperor replaces the usual conversations you would have with your coworkers. When you have feelings of dissent and you don't think anyone else in your unit has those same feelings of dissent, you might feel ashamed about yourself, you might feel a bit silly, you might feel scared, or more importantly, lonely. The Stormtrooper helmet is a piece of protection, but it also becomes a prison for the Imperials wearing it. And that's because for a Sith like Palpatine to truly break free of his chains, he has to basically put chains on everyone else.